The bustling Newark Liberty International Airport was alive with its usual symphony of rolling suitcases and hurried footsteps on a bright Sunday morning. Through the gleaming glass doors walked the Chen family, looking refreshed and ready for their upcoming vacation. Mr. Chen, a renowned tech executive known for his groundbreaking work in artificial intelligence, led the way while his wife, a brilliant pediatric surgeon, walked alongside their two kids. The family moved with an easy grace, their matching set of Louis Vuitton luggage trailing behind them. Their daughter, age 12, was buried in her favorite science book, occasionally looking up to avoid bumping into other travelers. Their 10-year-old son bounced excitedly beside them, chattering about the water parks they'd visit at their destination. Mrs. Chen had chosen comfort for their journey, wearing a sleek black tracksuit that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent, though she wore it with casual ease. Her husband matched her understated elegance in designer jeans and a simple white button-down shirt. The kids were dressed in comfortable travel clothes, their happy faces showing how thrilled they were about their first private jet experience. As they made their way through the terminal, other travelers couldn't help but notice them. Some smiled at the children's obvious excitement, while others did double takes at their expensive luggage. The family had grown used to such looks over the years, though they never let it bother them. They were successful professionals who had worked incredibly hard to achieve their dreams, and they had earned every bit of luxury they enjoyed. The morning sun streamed through the airport's massive windows, catching the polished brass hardware on their luggage. Mrs. Chen checked their documentation one more time, a habit from her meticulous surgical career, while her husband answered a quick business call about a major tech deal that couldn't wait until after their vacation. Their kids had stopped at the airport bookstore, pressing their faces against the window to look at the latest releases. Their mother smiled, remembering how she used to do the same thing at their age, dreaming of the day she'd be able to buy any book she wanted. Now she could give her children those opportunities she once only dreamed about. The family's presence in the first-class terminal area was notable not because they stood out, but because they carried themselves with such natural confidence. They weren't trying to prove anything to anyone. They were simply a family looking forward to their vacation, chatting about the adventures ahead of them. Little did they know that their peaceful morning was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would not only test their patience but would also become a powerful lesson about prejudice and dignity in modern America. For now, though, they were just focused on making their way to the security checkpoint, their Louis Vuitton luggage rolling smoothly behind them, their travel documents ready, and their spirits high with vacation excitement. The scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted from a nearby cafe, mixing with the crisp, air-conditioned atmosphere of the terminal. Their son tugged at his father's sleeve, asking if they could grab some hot chocolate before heading to their gate. Mrs. Chen checked her elegant watch. They had plenty of time before their scheduled departure. After all, one of the perks of flying private was not having to rush through the airport like other travelers. As they paused to consider a quick coffee stop, they couldn't have known that someone was watching them with narrowed eyes, making assumptions that would soon turn their peaceful morning into something entirely different. Just as the Chen family was about to step into the cafe, a sharp voice cut through the ambient airport noise. "Excuse me." The words came from a woman in her mid-50s, wearing a beige cardigan and sporting an expression that suggested she'd just bitten into something sour. She marched toward them with the confidence of someone who believed they were about to right a terrible wrong. The woman's heels clicked against the airport floor as she approached, her designer handbag swinging with each determined step. Her perfectly styled hair and manicured nails suggested someone used to a certain lifestyle, someone who probably spent her weekends at country clubs and hosted dinner parties where people discussed real estate prices over wine. "Those bags," she said, pointing at their Louis Vuitton luggage with a perfectly manicured finger, "where did you get them?" Her tone carried an accusation that didn't need to be spelled out. The cafe patrons nearby stopped stirring their coffees, and a few pulled out their phones, sensing that something was about to unfold. Mrs. Chen instinctively moved closer to her children, while her husband stepped forward slightly. Their daughter had finally looked up from her book, her eyes wide with confusion. Their son, usually bubbling with energy, went quiet, pressing himself against his mother's side. "I don't believe these belong to you," the woman continued, her voice growing louder with each word. "Do you know how much these cost?" "There's no way." She let the implication hang in the air, heavy and ugly. A small crowd had begun to gather, some watching with disapproval, others with uncomfortable recognition of a scene they'd seen play out too many times before. The woman's face had grown red with what she probably thought was righteous indignation. She pulled out her phone, making a show of dialing security. "I'm reporting this right now. I shop at Louis Vuitton regularly, and I know what kind of people usually buy these bags." She emphasized the word people in a way that made her meaning crystal clear. Mr. Chen, who had negotiated million-dollar deals and handled corporate crises, maintained his composure. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but firm. "Ma'am, I understand you're concerned, but you're making unfair assumptions that are upsetting my children." He gestured toward his kids, who were watching the scene unfold with a mixture of fear and confusion. But the woman wasn't finished. She raised her voice even higher, attracting more attention. "Oh, don't try to make me feel guilty. I'm doing my civic duty here. These bags cost thousands of dollars each. I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking." A few heads in the crowd shook in disagreement, while others pulled out their phones to record the increasingly tense situation. Mrs. Chen, still standing protectively near her children, spoke up. Her voice carried the same assured tone she used in the operating room. "Our possessions are not your concern. Please step away from my family." The statement was simple but powerful, delivered with the quiet authority of someone used to being respected in their field. The woman's response was to wave her phone more frantically. "Security is on their way. We'll sort this out properly. I've seen too many stolen goods being carried through this airport, and I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen again." Her voice had taken on a shrill quality that echoed through the terminal. Their son tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering, "Mom, why is that lady so angry at us?" The question, innocent and confused, carried across the now quiet space. Several onlookers exchanged glances, their discomfort with the situation evident on their faces. The coffee shop barista, who had been watching the scene unfold, stepped forward with 2 hot chocolates. "Here," she said kindly to the children on the house. It was a small gesture of solidarity, but it spoke volumes. The woman in the beige cardigan shot the barista a look of betrayal, as if the entire world was conspiring against her sense of justice. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other travelers had stopped pretending to mind their own business, openly watching the drama unfold. Some had their phones raised, recording what they probably assumed would become the next viral Karen video on social media. Little did the angry woman know, her accusations were about to backfire in the most spectacular way. As she stood there, phone in hand, waiting for security to arrive, she had no idea that her next few moments would become a lesson in humility that she'd never forget. Within minutes, 2 airport security officers arrived at the scene, their blue uniforms standing out against the terminal's neutral colors. The first officer, a tall woman with kind eyes, took in the situation with a practiced glance. Her partner, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, positioned himself between the growing crowd and the family. The one in the beige cardigan practically leaped forward. "Finally, these people," she gestured dramatically at the Chen family, "are carrying stolen Louis Vuitton luggage. I want you to check their receipts and ID." Her voice carried the triumphant tone of someone who believed justice was about to be served. Mrs. Chen had already pulled out her phone and started recording, her surgeon's hands steady as she documented the encounter. Her husband stood calmly beside her, his business phone still buzzing with notifications in his pocket. Their children huddled close, sipping the hot chocolates the kind barista had given them, their eyes darting between the security officers and the angry woman. The female officer spoke first, her voice professional but warm. "Ma'am, what evidence do you have that these items are stolen?" The question was directed at the accuser, but her eyes noted the family's composed demeanor and their children's obvious distress. "Just look at them," the woman sputtered, her designer handbag swinging wildly as she gestured. "Do they look like they can afford Louis Vuitton? I shop there all the time, and I know what kind of people." She trailed off as several onlookers gasped at her blatant prejudice. The male officer stepped forward, his expression stern. "Ma'am, we don't make assumptions about people's ability to purchase items based on their appearance." His words were measured but carried a clear warning about the dangerous territory she was entering. A young woman in the crowd called out, I've got this whole thing on video." Others nodded, their phones still recording. The airport had become an impromptu courtroom, with the public serving as silent witnesses to this display of prejudice. The children's scientific books lay forgotten on a nearby seat, their hot chocolate cups half empty. The younger child whispered to his sister, "Are we in trouble?" The question carried through the tense air, making several onlookers shake their heads in sympathy. Mrs. Chen spoke up, her voice steady and clear. "Officers, I'm happy to show you our documentation. However, I want to be clear that this woman has been harassing my family and making racist assumptions about our ability to own luxury items." Her words were precise, just as they were in the operating room when she was directing her surgical team. Her husband added quietly, "We've been dealing with this kind of prejudice for years, but it's particularly disappointing to have our children exposed to it." His calm demeanor spoke of someone used to handling high-pressure situations in corporate boardrooms. The woman's face flushed deeper red. "I'm not racist, I'm just being cautious. There's been so much theft lately, and when you see something suspicious..." She gestured at their luggage again, her hands shaking slightly now. The female officer turned to Mr. Chen. "Sir, would you mind showing us your ID and any relevant documentation?" Her tone made it clear this was a formality to resolve the situation, not a validation of the woman's accusations. As Mr. Chen reached for his wallet, his phone buzzed again. The screen lit up with a notification about the tech deal he'd been working on, a $50 million acquisition that would make headlines tomorrow. He smiled slightly at the irony as he pulled out his ID. The crowd had grown larger, with airport staff trying to maintain clear pathways for other travelers. The coffee shop had gone quiet, the espresso machine's hiss providing an oddly tense soundtrack to the scene. The barista who had given the children hot chocolate stood watching, her arms crossed, clearly troubled by what she was witnessing. The security officers examined the Chen family's documentation with professional efficiency, but everyone could see from their expressions that they knew this situation was wrong from the start. The woman in the beige cardigan shifted her weight from foot to foot, her initial confidence beginning to crack as she noticed more and more disapproving looks from the crowd. What nobody knew yet was that this confrontation was about to take an even more dramatic turn. The woman's self-righteous bubble was about to burst in a way that would make her wish she never opened her mouth in the first place, and it would all unfold in front of dozens of witnesses with their phones still recording, ensuring that this moment would become more than just another airport incident. It would become a lesson about prejudice that would soon be seen by millions. The female security officer finished reviewing Mr. Chen's documentation, and a subtle change came over her face. She glanced at her partner, who had also noticed something significant on the ID and business cards. The woman in the beige cardigan was still standing there, tapping her foot impatiently, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. "Sir," the female officer said, addressing Mr. Chen with newfound respect, "I apologize for this inconvenience. We can see that you're the CEO of Tech Future Innovations." She turned to Mrs. Chen, "And you're the head of pediatric surgery at Metropolitan Hospital." The revelation caused a ripple of murmurs through the crowd. The woman in the cardigan's mouth dropped open slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Anyone can fake business cards," she said, though her voice had lost some of its previous confidence. The male officer shook his head, clearly embarrassed by her persistence. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "Mr. Chen's company was featured on the cover of Business Weekly last month. Their innovative AI developments have revolutionized medical technology." He paused, then added, "And Dr. Chen's surgical techniques have saved hundreds of children's lives." The crowd's whispers grew louder. Someone in the back called out, "Hey, isn't she the doctor who performed that miracle surgery last year? The one that made national news?" Mrs. Chen remained composed, though a slight flush colored her cheeks at the recognition. Their daughter, still holding her science book, spoke up unexpectedly. "Mom saved my best friend's little brother," she said, her voice clear and proud. "She can fix hearts that other doctors can't." The simple, honest statement from a child carried more weight than any professional accolade. The barista who had given the children hot chocolate was now nodding vigorously. "I knew I recognized you. My nephew was your patient last year. You fixed his heart condition when everyone else said it was impossible." Her eyes were shining with gratitude. The woman in the cardigan's face had gone from red to pale. She clutched her designer handbag closer as if it could shield her from the growing embarrassment. I was just trying to be careful, she stammered, but her words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Mr. Chen's phone buzzed again, and this time he glanced at it with a slight smile. Our company just closed a $50 million deal, he said quietly to the officers. That's why my phone keeps going off. We're actually headed to a celebration with our board members. He wasn't bragging. His tone suggested he was simply explaining the situation. The female officer turned to the woman in the cardigan, her expression now stern. Ma'am, profiling and harassing other travelers is not acceptable behavior. These are highly respected professionals who have contributed significantly to our community. She paused, then added, Would you like to file a formal complaint? Because I should warn you, making false accusations can have serious consequences. The crowd had grown even larger, with people standing on tiptoes to see what was happening. Some were already posting videos to social media, their comments ranging from angry to supportive of the Chen family. The airport staff had to keep reminding people to maintain clear walkways. Mrs. Chen's phone was still recording, capturing every moment of this turning point. Their son, who had been quiet throughout the ordeal, suddenly tugged at his father's sleeve. Dad, can we still get ice cream on the plane? The innocent question brought gentle laughter from the onlookers, breaking some of the tension. The woman in the cardigan was now backing away slowly, her earlier righteousness completely deflated. But the story wasn't over yet. There was still one more revelation to come, one that would turn this already uncomfortable situation into an unforgettable lesson about prejudice and assumptions. The cherry on top was about to be served, and everyone in the terminal was about to witness it. Just as the woman in the beige cardigan was contemplating her escape from this increasingly embarrassing situation, a new figure appeared in the terminal. A tall man in a crisp pilot's uniform, complete with golden epaulettes on his shoulders, walked purposefully toward the group. His polished shoes clicked against the airport floor as he approached, catching everyone's attention. The pilot smiled warmly at the Chen family. "Good morning, Dr. Chen." "Mr. Chen," he said with professional courtesy. "I apologize for the delay. Your private jet is ready for boarding." His words cut through the airport noise like a knife through butter, causing the woman in the cardigan to freeze mid-step. Behind the pilot, two flight attendants in elegant uniforms were already approaching with a luggage cart. "We'll take care of your bags," one of them said cheerfully. "The champagne is chilled, and the children's favorite snacks are stocked as requested." The crowd's reaction was immediate. Phones were raised higher, capturing what was surely going to be a viral moment. The woman in the cardigan stood rooted to the spot, her designer handbag hanging limply at her side, as she watched the flight attendants carefully loading the supposedly stolen Louis Vuitton luggage onto their cart. "Your board members are already waiting in the private lounge," the pilot continued, seemingly oblivious to the drama he had walked into. "And the catering service has prepared that special chocolate cake your daughter loved from last time." The young girl's face lit up at this mention, momentarily forgetting the unpleasant encounter they'd just experienced. The security officers exchanged knowing looks. The female officer turned to the woman in the cardigan with raised eyebrows. "Still want to file that complaint about stolen luggage, ma'am?" Her tone was professional, but carried a hint of satisfaction at seeing justice unfold naturally. The woman's face had turned an interesting shade of gray. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again, but no words came out. Several onlookers had their hands over their mouths, trying to hide their smiles at this perfect moment of karma. Mrs. Chen's phone was still recording as one of the flight attendants gestured toward the exclusive terminal area. "Right this way, please. We've arranged for priority security clearance." The contrast between this VIP treatment and the recent accusations couldn't have been more stark. Their son, excited about the mention of his favorite snacks, had recovered his usual bounce. "Mom, did they get those special cookies too? The ones shaped like airplanes?" His innocent question in the midst of this tense situation made several people in the crowd chuckle warmly. The pilot checked his gold watch. "We're actually running slightly ahead of schedule now. The weather conditions are perfect for flying." He gestured toward the private terminal entrance, where the frosted glass doors marked "Exclusive stood waiting. Someone in the crowd whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "That's that private jet. The one with their company logo on it." The murmur spread through the onlookers, and several people were already searching on their phones, likely looking up Tech Future Innovations and its CEO. The woman in the cardigan had begun to back away more quickly now, her designer heels clicking frantically against the floor. But she wasn't quite fast enough to escape what happened next. One of the flight attendants, arranging the luggage on the cart, called out, "Oh, Dr. Chen, the hospital board sent over the press release about your revolutionary surgical technique. They'd like your approval before they announce it next week." This final revelation was too much for some in the crowd. A few people actually applauded, while others shook their heads at the absurdity of anyone questioning this family's right to carry luxury luggage. The woman in the cardigan was now trying to disappear behind a pillar, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. The children, finally relaxing as they saw the familiar faces of their flight crew, began to chat excitedly about the journey ahead. Their innocent excitement served as a powerful reminder of how needless prejudice can taint even the simplest of family moments. Before heading to their private terminal, Mrs. Chen did something unexpected. She handed her phone to her husband and walked toward the woman who was trying to hide behind the pillar. The crowd went quiet, phones still recording, wondering what would happen next. Even the security officers watched with interest, curious about how this successful surgeon would handle her accuser. "I'd like to speak with you for a moment," Mrs. Chen said, her voice gentle but firm. The woman flinched slightly but had nowhere to run without making an even bigger scene. Her beige cardigan seemed to have lost its crispness, much like her earlier confidence. "My children are watching," Mrs. Chen continued, gesturing to her young son and daughter who stood with their father. "They're watching to see how we handle this situation, and I believe your reaction right now is just as important as mine." Her words carried no anger, only a calm wisdom that came from years of dealing with life and death situations in the operating room. The crowd leaned in slightly, straining to hear. The airport's usual noise seemed to fade into the background as this important moment unfolded. The barista who had given the children hot chocolate had stepped out from behind her counter, coffee pot still in hand, frozen in place by the scene. "When you looked at us," Mrs. Chen said, "you saw what you expected to see. You didn't see a doctor who spent 12 years training to save children's lives. You didn't see a tech innovator who's creating jobs for thousands of people. You didn't see two kids who love science and dream of changing the world." The woman's eyes had begun to glisten with tears of shame. Her designer handbag, which she'd wielded like a symbol of authority earlier, now hung limply at her side. Several onlookers nodded in agreement with Mrs. Chen's words, some wiping their own eyes. "But here's what matters now," Mrs. Chen continued, her voice softening further. "My children are watching to see if people can learn and grow from their mistakes. They're watching to see if the world is as divided as it sometimes appears, or if there's hope for understanding." The flight attendants had paused in their duties, the luggage cart temporarily forgotten. The pilot stood respectfully to the side, his usual schedule-focused demeanor replaced by quiet appreciation for this moment of human connection. "I don't want you to leave here feeling only shame," Mrs. Chen said, surprising everyone. "I want you to leave here feeling responsibility. Responsibility to do better, to look deeper, to question your assumptions. Not just for my children's future, but for everyone's children." The woman finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry," she said, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I was so wrong, so terribly wrong." Her words seemed to catch in her throat. Mrs. Chen nodded, acknowledging the apology. "Growth starts with admitting our mistakes," she said. Then she did something that shocked everyone. She pulled out one of her business cards. "If you're serious about wanting to do better, my hospital runs a community program about diversity in healthcare. We'd welcome your participation." The crowd murmured in appreciation. Someone in the back started clapping, and soon others joined in. The security officers exchanged impressed looks. They'd seen many airport confrontations, but never one that ended quite like this. The children watched this exchange with wide eyes, absorbing a lesson more valuable than anything they could learn in school. Their father stood proudly behind them, still recording on his wife's phone, capturing this moment of grace and wisdom for posterity. As Mrs. Chen turned to rejoin her family, the woman called out one more time, her voice stronger now. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for showing me kindness I didn't deserve." The words hung in the air, a testament to how a moment of prejudice had been transformed into an opportunity for growth. The next morning, the airport incident had gone viral. Someone had compiled the various phone recordings into a single video, which was spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story, running headlines about how a distinguished doctor and tech CEO had turned a moment of prejudice into an opportunity for education and growth. The video ended with Mrs. Chen's compassionate speech, and the comments section was flooded with messages of support and admiration. "This is how you handle ignorance with grace," one popular comment read. "Those children learned such a valuable lesson about dignity," said another. The hashtag airport karma was trending, but surprisingly, most of the discussions focused on the positive outcome rather than shaming the woman in the beige cardigan. Back at Metropolitan Hospital, Mrs. Chen arrived for her morning rounds to find her email inbox overflowing. Medical students, fellow doctors, and parents of former patients had all written to express their appreciation for how she handled the situation. One email particularly touched her. It was from a young black medical student who wrote about how seeing the video had given her renewed hope about her future in medicine. Meanwhile, at Tech Future Innovations, Mr. Chen was in a board meeting when his PR team rushed in with news. The company's social media engagement had skyrocketed overnight. But instead of focusing on the negative incident, people were praising how the family had demonstrated their values in action. The company's commitment to diversity and inclusion wasn't just a corporate policy, it was clearly lived by its leadership. The children had their own moment of fame at school. Their classmates were amazed by how calmly they'd handled the situation. Their daughter's science teacher used the incident as a springboard for a class discussion about prejudice and scientific achievement, highlighting the contributions of diverse scientists throughout history. The most surprising development came a week later. The woman in the beige cardigan, true to the lesson she'd learned, actually showed up at the hospital's community program. She looked nervous as she walked in, but Mrs. Chen's staff welcomed her warmly. Over the next few months, she became a regular volunteer, working specifically with families who felt intimidated by the medical system. The incident sparked a broader conversation about assumptions and privilege. Several major airlines reached out to the Chen family, asking them to participate in a campaign about treating all passengers with respect. Mr. Chen's company used the momentum to launch a scholarship program for underprivileged students interested in tech careers. Their son, inspired by the events, started a club at his school called Breaking Barriers, where kids could share their experiences with prejudice and brainstorm ways to create positive change. Their daughter began giving talks at science fairs about how diversity makes science stronger, sharing her mother's story as an example. The airport staff who had witnessed the incident made changes too. The coffee shop where the kind barista works now had a sign reading "Everyone welcome here," prominently displayed. The security officers developed a new training program about handling bias-motivated complaints, using the incident as a case study in professional intervention. 3 months after the incident, Mrs. Chen received another email. It was from the woman in the beige cardigan, sharing how her volunteer work had opened her eyes. She'd started a support group for people wanting to overcome their prejudices, naming it Growth Through Grace, in honor of how Mrs. Chen had treated her that day. The family's private jet company also made changes, implementing new training for their staff about recognizing and addressing discrimination. They featured the story in their corporate newsletter, highlighting how their crew members had played a small but significant role in exposing prejudice that day. 1 year later, when the Chen family took another vacation, something had changed at Newark Liberty International Airport. The terminal where the incident had occurred now displayed a large photo exhibition celebrating diversity in achievement: doctors, scientists, business leaders, and innovators from all backgrounds. And there, among the inspiring images, was a photo of the Chen family with a simple caption: "Success has no bias. Dreams have no limits."